Voters in Tucson can shift their attention to the general election. This week, the city tallied ballots in its all-male primary. The three-way race between Democratic candidates for mayor topped the ticket. City Councilwoman Regina Romero easily won with about 50% of the vote. To unpack the results and help us look ahead to November's general, we turn to the Tucson Sentinel's Dylan Smith, the Arizona Daily Star's Sarah Garrett-Gasson, and Tucson Local Media's Jim Ninsel. My thanks to the three of you for being here. Jim, let's begin with you. Regina Romero really won this race very easily.
She did. She ran away with it, 12-point margin over Steve Farley. I think a lot of that had to do with, number one, I think Democrats are leaning towards women and people of color, all things being equal, and there wasn't a lot of difference between where these candidates stood on a lot of issues. So I think people were looking at secondary characteristics. Number two, she had more money, and her allies had more money to spend on getting the word out about why you should vote for Regina Romero. And finally, I think that she just had a great ground game that figured out which voters to target and how to get them to the polls.
She also has name recognition, though. She's been on the council for a long time now.
I think, name recognition certainly plays a role. We saw that, Randy Dorman didn't have the same level of name recognition and, came in a pretty distant third. Plenty of people have heard of Steve Farley. Plenty of people in Tucson have cast ballots for Steve Farley, just like they have for Regina Romero. So I don't think it all comes down just to that, but certainly, as Jim was saying, I think a lot of it was the ground game, the ability of what is, sometimes referred to as the Grijalva machine. It's just people who know how to get their voters to the polls time and time again.
Sarah, though, the Arizona Daily Star endorsed Regina and Sammy in Ward 1, and neither one of those, Randy, excuse me, and neither one of those candidates, that didn't do much for them. Why not?
Well, I think part of the issue that we had in this election, this primary, is a really good issue, and that we had a lot of really good candidates. So the Arizona Daily Star editorial board, we did discuss it at length. It was very close. It was very, there was a lot of moving parts to different people's positions not being very far apart from each other. So what we did is we looked at the job of the mayor and then evaluated the candidates against that. And we came up with deciding that Randy Dorman, we thought, in this particular job, in this particular election, was probably best suited for the mayor, and Sammy Hamid on Ward 1. But it wasn't, sometimes in elections, we all know, there's like a clearly way better candidate than another candidate. And that wasn't the case in this election. We had good candidates to choose from, and when it came down to it, I don't think voters really could make a bad choice.
Dylan, what comes of the general election when Ed Ackerley, an independent, faces off against Regina?
I think he's going to pick up a little bit of support from especially some folks in the business community and Republicans who are adamantly opposed to Regina Romero being the mayor. I don't know if that's going to be anywhere near enough support. It's hard to run as an independent. You need to have a political party and all the the parts, the volunteers, the access to data that comes along with that, and it's going to be a pretty big lift. And there's also going to be a Green Party candidate on that ballot in November, Mike Cease. So there'll be somebody running basically to Regina Romero's left, and especially on a number of issues, and that'll help position her a little bit, as more of a centrist choice. Although some people would certainly, I guess, disagree with that characterization of her.
Yeah, I think the business community, and I heard this a lot from various people out there, that there was this belief that Regina Romero was not friendly to business. This is something Regina was well aware of. She has worked to counter that. When you talk to her, she's always talking about economic development, tries to steer the conversation in that direction. She had Cody Ritchie, the Republican insurance company owner, who was a co-chair of her campaign. That led to some controversy during the campaign because he's given money to Trump, and they were trying to link Regina to Trump, which is a pretty ridiculous accusation to make. But that aside, I think the last time we had a crowded Democratic primary in 1999 in this town. Molly McCassin came out the winner of that. She was also perceived as very left-wing, and Bob Walkup, the Republican, was able to squeak by and win that race, and it was pretty unexpected. That said, Walkup, as Dylan pointed out, had the support of the Republican Party, and that mechanism and that support is not going to be there for Ackerley, so he's going to have a harder time succeeding than
in that race, Walkup had a lot of very early support. He started building his campaign, a couple of years before he ran, and had really lined up, a pretty good machine behind him. I think as some of the folks some Republicans especially start to learn a little bit more about what Ed Ackerley is proposing, they may not be so excited. He's come out very recently in favor of making suntan buses free for everyone, extending light rail all over the community. These are not sort of traditional business community talking points that he's coming out with. And he's been a Democrat until this year, his whole life. He registered as a Democrat in 1977 and switched to no party just this January.
And so pretty savvy political move to not get pushed off the ballot in the Democratic primary. I do think that there will be an outpouring for Rahina specifically because it will be seen as, for a lot of people, a vote against Trump. It's very much voting for Rahina Romero, Latina woman, for mayor in Tucson, I think is a big statement for a lot of folks, and that will energize some people who may not have come out to vote for the Tucson mayor otherwise. I really do think that who she is, in addition to her progressive policies and viewpoints, I think will be a greater push for some folks in the general election.
And I think it's safe to say that at this point, Democrats would crawl over choice fields in order to vote for Democrats at the ballot box.
Rahina says she's going to take Ed Ackerley seriously, as she should. Do we anticipate a contentious race as we approach November?
We'll see just how much traction Ackerley's campaign gets. We just saw a pretty contentious primary against people who generally agree with each other. Perhaps having a little bit more room for policy disagreements between those two would mean a less personal race. They might talk a little bit more about the issues.
Okay, and a big topic that we'll be discussing here shortly after the break, the Sanctuary City.